MK Ultra was a top secret CIA project in which the agency conducted hundreds of clandestine experiments, sometimes on unwitting US citizens, to assess the potential use of LSD and other drugs for mind control, information gathering, and psychological torture. Though Project MK Ultra lasted from 1953 until about 1973, details of the illicit program didn't become public until 1975 during a congressional investigation into widespread illegal CIA activities within the United States and around the world. Some say Project MK Ultra didn't die in 1973, but is still very much alive till this day.
Two American spies have just arrived at Sandoz Laboratories, one of the world's leading pharmaceutical factories. The mission: corner the market on the world's supply of a powerful new psychoactive drug.
The CIA was scared stiff the KGB was going to get all this LSD and come over and start dosing people. So we bought every drop of LSD in existence at that point.
The CIA has just authorized the purchase of 10 kilograms of pure LSD-25, enough to dose more than half the population of the United States.
And that's not even the most disturbing part. Check this out. Operation Midnight Climax was an MK Ultra project in which government-employed women lured unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses where drug experiments took place. The CIA dosed the men with LSD and then, while at times drinking cocktails behind two-way mirror, watched the drug's effects on the men's behavior. Recording devices were installed in the women's rooms disguised as electrical outlets.
They gave it to George White and let George start dosing people.
George Hunter White, a larger-than-life undercover federal narcotics agent. Unbeknownst to his supervisors, White also works for the CIA. His job: to conduct experiments for an operation called Midnight Climax.
George had a CIA safe house stocked with booze. George would sit behind this one-way mirror, drinking martinis, sitting on a portable toilet. If he had to take a leak, he didn't want to get up and leave.
White pays prostitutes to lure their clients to the agency's safe house.
Hookers who would bring these suckers back to the apartment and dose them with pure LSD-25.
This is where I have my effect.
Most of Operation Midnight Climax experiments took place in San Francisco, Marin County, California, and in New York City. The program had little oversight, and the CIA agents involved admitted that a freewheeling, party-like atmosphere prevailed. An agent named George White wrote to Gottlieb in 1971, quote, "Of course, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic. But I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, deceive, pillage with the sanction and blessings of the All-Highest?"
If he had to take a leak, he didn't want to get up and leave.
White pays prostitutes to lure their clients to the agency's safe house.
Hookers who would bring these suckers back to the apartment and dose them with pure LSD-25.
This is where I have my effect. In the mind.
This is lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as acid. The powerful drug was first synthesized in 1938 in Switzerland. With a dose of mere micrograms, the mind becomes confused. Perception is distorted. Personal identity is called into question. The results can be euphoric bliss or deadly panic.
But who in the world is Frank Olson? And how did he die? Frank Olson was a scientist who worked for the CIA. At a 1953 CIA retreat, Olson drank a cocktail that had been secretly spiked with LSD. A few days later, on November 28, 1953, Olson tumbled to his death from the window of a New York City hotel room in an alleged self-exit. The family of Frank Olson decided to have a second autopsy performed in 1994. A forensics team found injuries on the body that had likely occurred before the fall. The findings sparked conspiracy theories that Olson might have been oofed by the CIA themselves. After prolonged legal proceedings, Olson's family was awarded a settlement of $750,000 and received a personal apology from the President Gerald Ford and then CIA Director William Colby.
White takes meticulous notes and files his reports to his CIA handlers.
So that was how LSD was introduced to this country.
Operation Midnight Climax is part of a larger top-secret CIA program called MK Ultra. The goal: learn how to control and even reprogram people's minds. The CIA believes LSD might hold the key. Over the next 10 years, the agency doses a cross-section of the American public. Everyone from unwitting housewives to soldiers to even criminals like gangster Whitey Bulger is tested.
You know, what the CIA really dreamed of was sort of like a drug you could give to someone, get them to commit all sorts of unspeakable acts, and they wake up the next day and they don't remember what they've done.
They were looking into brainwashing. They were looking into mind control. They were looking into how they could create what they called Manchurian candidates. They were trying to figure out if they could get people to go out and do things that they would ordinarily not do, like assassination.
And if you thought it was crazy that they were secretly dosing people without their knowledge, Ken Kesey volunteered. He was the author of the 1962 novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He volunteered for MK Ultra experiments with LSD while he was a college student at Stanford University. Kesey later went on to promote the drug, hosting LSD-fueled parties that he called acid tests. Acid tests combined drug use with musical performances by bands including the Grateful Dead, psychedelic effects such as fluorescent paint and black lights. These parties influenced the early development of hippie culture and kick-started the 1960s psychedelic drug scene.
The case of MK Ultra has to be one of the craziest cases of blowback in CIA history, because here they took this drug, LSD, and thought that they were going to be able to use it to control people's minds, and the unbelievable irony is that LSD is a drug that does exactly the opposite. It frees your mind and causes people to question authority.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
The CIA's attempt to control people turned out to be just the opposite. It created the counterculture as we know it of the 60s. It was the CIA that introduced LSD to the United States.
And like any good old conspiracy that turned true, the rabbit hole gets even deeper. Church Committee. In 1974, New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh published a story about how the CIA had conducted non-consensual drug experiments and illegal spying operations on US citizens. His report started the lengthy process of bringing long-suppressed details about MK Ultra to light. The following year, President Ford, in the wake of the Watergate scandal and amid growing distrust of the US government, set up the United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States to investigate illegal CIA activities, including Project MK Ultra and other experiments on unsuspecting citizens. The commission was led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and is commonly referred to as the Rockefeller Commission. The Church Committee, helmed by Idaho Democratic Senator Frank Church, was a larger investigation into the abuses of the CIA, FBI, and other U.S. intelligence agencies during and after the resignation of President Richard Nixon. The Church Committee delved into plots to self-exit foreign leaders, including Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba, and it also uncovered thousands of documents related to MK Ultra. These revelations resulted in Ford's 1976 executive order on intelligence activities that prohibited, quote, experimentation with drugs on human subjects except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each such human subject. MK Ultra was essentially a continuation of work that began in Japanese and Nazi concentration camps. Not only was it roughly based on those experiments, but the CIA actually hired the vivisectionists and the torturers who worked in Japan and in Nazi concentration camps to come and explain what they had found out so we could build on their research. For example, Nazi doctors had conducted extensive experiments with mescaline in the Dachau concentration camp, and the CIA was very interested in figuring out whether mescaline could be the key to mind control. That was one of their biggest avenues of investigation, so they hired Nazi doctors who had been involved in that project to advise them. Another thing the Nazis provided was information about poison gases like sarin, which was still being used. Nazi doctors came to America, to Fort Detrick in Maryland, which was the center of this project, to lecture CIA officers and tell them how long it took for people to die from sarin. And if you thought that is all disturbing, here are some even more extreme experiments conducted overseas. Gottlieb and the CIA established secret detention centers throughout Europe and East Asia, particularly in Japan, Germany, and the Philippines, which were largely under American control in the period of the early 50s. And therefore, Gottlieb didn't have to worry about any legal entanglements in these places. CIA officers in Europe and Asia were capturing enemy agents and others who felt they might be suspected persons or were otherwise what they called expendable. They would grab these people and throw them into cells and then test all kinds of not just drug potions, but other techniques like electroshock, extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, all the meantime bombarding them with questions, trying to see if they could break down resistance and find a way to destroy the human ego. So these were projects designed not only to understand the human mind, but to figure out how to destroy it. And that made Gottlieb, although in some ways a very compassionate person, certainly the most prolific torturer of his generation. Gottlieb operated almost completely without supervision. He had sort of a checkoff from his titular boss and from his real boss, Richard Helms, and from the CIA director, Alan Dulles, but none of them really wanted to know what he was doing. This guy had a license to kill. He was allowed to requisition human subjects across the United States and around the world and subject them to any kind of abuse that he wanted, even up to the level of it being fatal. Yet nobody looked over his shoulder. He never had to file serious reports to anybody. I think the mentality must have been that this project is so important, mind control, if it can be mastered, is the key to global world power. This is how Gottlieb got away with it. The end of Gottlieb's career came in 1973 when his patron Richard Helms, who was then director of the CIA, was removed by President Richard Nixon. Once Helms was gone, it was just a matter of time until Gottlieb would be gone too. Most important was that Helms was really the only person at the CIA who had any idea of what Gottlieb had been doing. So as they were both on their way out of the CIA, they agreed that they should destroy all records of MK Ultra. Gottlieb actually drove out to the CIA Records Center and ordered the archives to destroy boxes full of MK Ultra records. However, it turns out that there were still some records found in other places. There was a depot for expense account reports that had not been destroyed, and various other pieces of paper remain. So there is enough out there to reconstruct some of what he did, but his effort to wipe away his traces by destroying all those documents in the early 70s was quite successful.